Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana Q if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is April the 12th. It is Tuesday, and today I am joined by Representative Neil Rafferty. Now, Neil is the only openly gay member of Alabama's legislature, and if you paid any attention last week, you might have heard some pretty powerful words from Neil on Thursday afternoon when his Republican colleagues were pushing through some bills that ended up becoming laws on Friday that many people believe are anti-LGBTQ plus. Now, Neil, again, thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk about some of this. I've got a lot of questions for you, a lot of things I want to hear your thoughts on. But I think first it is important to go over what these two now laws actually do and what they say before we get into talking about them. So I'm going to do that quickly first.
Absolutely.
First, we have what was called SB 184, which again is now a law. Governor Ivey signed this legislation into law on Friday. Now, SB 184 is also called the Alabama Vulnerable Child Protection Act. Now, what this law does is it criminalizes gender affirming healthcare essentially for transgender minors. So that is one piece of this legislation. Now, the second piece is HB 322, which many opponents have dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill because of an amendment that mirrored some Florida legislation that was pushed through Thursday with just minutes left in the legislative session. So there is that separate bill. Now that does several different things. Quickly, I'll go over them. It requires school personnel to report to parents if a student is questioning their gender identity, prohibit classroom instruction or discussion on gender identity or sexual orientation from grades kindergarten through 5, and require students in K through 12 public schools, that's essentially all public schools here in Alabama, to use the bathroom or the locker room that is assigned with the sex that is on their birth certificate and not what the student identifies with. So Neil, that's a lot of legislation right there. That's a lot for people and for voters to wrap their mind around. So first, just give me kind of your general thoughts on these two laws.
Well, I think the most pertinent thing that we got to say here is that, we're demonizing. Like the proponents of these bills have been demonizing hardworking Alabama families and their children to predicate a culture war, all under false pretenses. We want to talk SB 184, which bans criminalizes physicians for providing gender-affirming care. It's an unconscionable invasion into the privacy of family medical decisions that are done with the families and denying these families best practice evidence-based medicine. For the past 3 years, Ivana, proponents of this bill have built a false yet shocking narrative with a suggestion of this thing called, what they're saying is permanent mutilation. It's the lowest and most reprehensible, I would say, kind of exploitation of ignorance out there as far as what it means to be trans and what trans healthcare actually looks like. All evidence-based treatment models for gender-affirming care are slow. They're all incremental with physical and mental evaluations at every step of the way. But most importantly, and this is, I think, what I needs really to be out there and what needs to be heard, the treatments are reversible, and permanent surgeries or procedures on minors are not. They are not, I repeat, not within these standards of care for best practice. So it's just ludicrous that we're basing why we need to ban or getting involved in these private family medical decisions for medically necessary care, all based off a false pretense that this is permanent, that there's not a team of doctors and healthcare professionals that are working with the parents to do what they think is best for the child. And a stepwise, slow process. It's just it's just disgusting. It's just reprehensible.
There are people who support this bill, again, this now law, who say this is about protecting kids. That is why that they call it actually the Alabama Vulnerable Child Protecting Act. They say it's about protecting kids. What do you say to that?
I find it highly ironic and hypocritical to say that you're protecting vulnerable children while also putting a target on vulnerable children and their families' backs. That's it. It's a misnomer. It's a terrible claim. That's what I got to say about that.
This morning, one of our reporters was at an event that was attended by Governor Kay Ivey. This event had nothing to do with these laws, but our reporter did ask about these laws. And another reporter also in the press gaggle also asked some questions. And one thing that Governor Ivey said is she said that we need to protect kids from today's culture. She also mentioned the culture part of this as well, and said that with today, there are reasons, I'm assuming is what she means, for people to believe that they are transgender. Is this something that is influenced by culture? Are there more trans people now because of what we call today's culture than there used to be?
No, absolutely not. What we have now is we have a greater visibility. That's all it is. Trans folks have always existed. They've always been a part of the human experience throughout our whole history. I mean, it's not a new iteration or cultural phenomenon. What it is just there's larger visibility now because more people are willing to come out and be their authentic selves, and now they're getting punished for it.
You made again some a very powerful speech on Thursday afternoon when this bill came through. Now, I think part of the reason why this got so much attention and why so many people, especially like yourself and some of your colleagues here in the House, were so aggravated was that this amendment was not mentioned, was not brought up until there were, I believe, about half an hour left of this session. Now, you made a powerful speech, and I'll get to that in a minute, but you did make the point that you just said about that you believed this now law is putting a target on kids' and parents' backs. And you also said that it almost makes the government seem to tell parents, you don't know what's best for your kids, and tell doctors, you might have gone to medical school. We are not medical doctors, but you don't know what you're doing.
Right. So if we want to look at the Texas incident, all right, the Texas bill that came through or they were trying to push through was very similar to the one we have now. That one didn't get through. So then what the proponents of those bills tried to do was declare that it was child abuse for parents in order to put their children into gender affirming care, which once again is reversible and does not include any permanent procedures or surgeries as an evidence-based standard of care. So try to make that child abuse. So it is. I mean, what they're trying to do is say that if you do this, if you really love your child, and have struggled with this as a family together to come to terms with it. It's not like these families that came up here and testified, those brave families that came up here and testified on behalf of their children were 100% on board when they first found out. They just saw that this was the best case. This was how they see their child happy now because they're able to be their authentic selves. They're able to support because they see their children being their authentic selves. So it's just terrible. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than we don't know what we're doing. Okay. And it is like taking the 140 of us, 105 down in the House and 35 up in the Senate and getting in that doctor's office and squeezing ourselves between the children and that team of healthcare providers and then saying, you don't know what's best. You don't love your kid. Here, let me tell you what you actually need to do, only because it doesn't fit within their narrow idea of what of the human experience and the diversity that entails and encompasses. It's just really sad. There's nothing small government. There's no freedom. There's nothing conservative about this bill. If we want to take the word transgender or gender affirming care out of this bill entirely, okay, and say that there is a treatment here that could work for another ailment or another affliction that somebody might be dealing with. Would parents be okay with having their healthcare choices limited to what they're able to provide to their children?
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up. And again, we'll talk about this Alabama Vulnerable Child Protection Act, and we'll move on to the other law here in a few minutes. But while we're talking about this, again, this morning when our reporters met with Governor Kay Ivey at this other event, somebody in the group of press that was around the governor asked about her stance on coronavirus vaccines and mandates there, and said, Governor, you have said that you will not mandate coronavirus vaccines because people have the freedom you believe people should have the freedom to make their own medical decisions. When they asked why she then signed this law that does not allow transgender minors and their families to make their own medical decisions, she responded by saying that the transgender minors are too young to make that decision. So right. She pushed back against that idea of medical freedom for coronavirus vaccines versus medical freedom for transgender minors. What do you think about that?
Well, I think once again that is just a pivot play that is trying to dominate a narrative under false pretenses, because we really want to talk about what's actually happening here. We have got to keep in mind that, yes, no one's disagreeing with her. No one's disagreeing with the governor or any of the other proponents of this bill that children are too young to be making this decision on themselves. That is why it is done. With the parents around the child and then surrounding the family is a team of healthcare providers and mental health providers, providing the slow and incremental process that's not permanent, and where there's physical and mental evaluations at every step of the way. It is not a fast process. You know, it's a lifelong process, really, to come and accept yourself for who you are. But to see this, I mean, it's just, no, I don't buy that argument, because it's not understanding the fact that we're not talking about children's choices here. We're talking about families' choices here. We're talking about families' access to healthcare. We're talking about families' right to have the best medically accurate, scientifically based medicine available to them to treat their children with.
The other bill that, again, became a law on Friday is this one that requires a school personnel to not mention anything about gender or sexual orientation, gender identity from K through 5. And again, includes that, what a lot of people have been calling the bathroom bill, for people in school, for students to only use the bathrooms or locker rooms that align with the sex on their birth certificate instead of what they identify with. Again, this bill has a lot of different parts. You mentioned earlier it had several proponents to it. It's loaded. There's a lot in it. But the part that, again, was introduced on Thursday that was kind of the bombshell was this legislation, this amendment that mirrored Florida's, what people have been calling the Don't Say Gay bill. Tell me about that. Tell me about your feelings there. And again, that's when you made this powerful speech on Thursday. And I think anybody who listened to that could hear the emotion in your voice.
So once again, I mean, we're dealing with something that isn't an issue. That this Alabama School Board Association put out the report saying that they were going through everything. They were explaining what this law would do, and they said, honestly, we don't think that this law is going to do much, because it's not something that's happening, or not something that we're having to worry about now. So once again, we are trying to drive a culture war, a wedge issue, to distract us from the real issues impacting every Alabama child, meaning systemic issues and problems with how we properly and equitably fund our education system. We are 48th in mathematics, 49th in reading in this country. And this is what they decided. We have an issue with brain drain. We have an issue with, I mean, I can't even go with college expense and accessibility and health and educational disparities. And this is what we're going to focus our attention on. This is what we're going to spend political capital on, instead of fixing the real issues that every Alabamian has having to deal with. We're going to go over here and we're going to deal with this non-issue that's not affecting anybody, that most people just carry on and get along with their lives. And it's just preposterous that that's what we're going to do. That's what we're trying to do here, instead of addressing actual issues. No one wants to talk about those big issues, those big problems that we really need to be coming together, sitting at the table and working on. Instead, this is what they want to focus on. Just another culture war, driving a wedge to drive out base turnout, to spin a false narrative, to demonize somebody and have an enemy, so that that you can get people all riled up and scared without actually looking on the ground at what is actually happening, which is that our kids are not able to read, not able to do math, are not college and career ready. And that's what we're focusing on. Instead of focusing on that issue, we're going to focus on this non-issue over here. I mean, the people of Alabama should be outraged. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
This morning, the governor was asked if she was worried if there would be businesses who maybe pulled out of Alabama because of this type of legislation, which we have heard there are companies that do that, especially we've heard rumors of that happening in Florida as well. Now, what the governor said, and this is a quote, she said, quote, "Here in Alabama, we're here to do business, not politics." She continued to say, "We are certainly prepared to defend the lawsuit." There was one filed yesterday and one filed this morning in federal court. And she said, "We are certainly prepared to defend the lawsuit and Alabama values." And that was the end of the quote there. So do you agree that this is about business and not politics?
No, No, this is absolutely 100% about politics. They're trying to spin it as it's just about common sense. It's just, this is the right thing to do. Of course, this is, without taking into account all the other factors of the vast experience, the vast diversity of human experience. Just trying to undermine and cut that out. This is absolutely 100% about politics.
Do you think that LGBTQ plus, specifically trans teenagers, and trans young people, I should say as well, are being used almost as political pawns in this process?
100%. Yes. No, they're being used as political footballs. That's what's the most disgusting thing about this whole operation, is that we are talking about using children, a vulnerable population of children who are already having a tough enough time. Because like I said on the floor, growing up is tough. Growing up and being different is even tougher. But it's what can surmount that and being, growing up, being different, and then having the state legislator, your leaders, your elected officials sit there and put a target on your back. What's tougher than that? So yeah, I mean, this is 100% about politics. It's 100% about driving a wedge issue to distract us from the real problems that everyday Alabamians are doing. But at this time, they're using the kids as political footballs, and there will be, and we've already seen a tremendous amount of stress coming from families, coming from these kids who have been reaching out to not just me, but to other folks and saying, what's going to happen next? What are we supposed to do? What are we, they're terrified. And all I can say is that, we just have to make sure that the right thing and that justice prevails in this situation, and that we stop using kids as political pawns and far right-wing politics. Because once again, if she wants to say this ain't about politics, then explain why these bills are being introduced across the country, all at the same time. There's, I think, 350 bills introduced to state legislatures dealing with this. That all deal with children, particularly transgender children and their families and their support network. So,
Neil, do you think that growing up being a gay man, this would have, and a gay teenager at this point, how would this would have affected you if there was legislation and now again laws that mirror the ones that were passed on Friday? Do you think that you would be where you are today? Do you think that you would have the self-love that you have, or how do you think that would have affected your experience?
If I weren't, like, if I grew up and if I weren't,
if you grew up during this time where there are legislatures who are making laws about LGBTQ plus matters.
Well, there's a big part of me that, I grew up before we had marriage equality, before, for instance, Patricia Todd stepped up and became the first openly gay legislator in the state. So there was a time when, when I was growing up, and there was a time when I was growing up where I just thought we were past this, if you will. I thought we had moved on. I thought, that we were moving forward instead of trying to demonize LGBTQ people. I thought that we were finally in a place where, that wasn't going to be on the horizon anymore. Unfortunately, I was wrong. And where I was, if I was growing up right now, I'd probably be pretty scared too. Only because, like I said, I just thought we had moved past all this. But nope, here in 2022, we have a national agenda. Alabama is the focal point of this, where this is where we're going to be the experiment to see what it's going to look like when we start doing these things. And I just hope and pray that we don't end up with blood on our hands.
We have several reporters who have been speaking with teenagers who are trans, and specifically students in general. And I want to read you a few lines from them in their experiences. We have one teenager who said that he and other trans teens he knows he said that lawmakers seem to think that they are, quote, this way for attention, assuming that, again, he and his friends are doing this for some kind of attention. And he said, quote, we don't want that. We just want to exist without attention.
Exactly.
And do you agree with that? Do you think that most people share that same sentiment?
Yeah, no, like the old joke is LGBTQ agenda is Taco Tuesday and being left alone.
There's also another teenager who said that not letting kids talk about their gender in schools, again, which is what that second law that I mentioned will do. And again, that goes into effect here pretty soon. But this teenager said not letting kids talk about that and gender in schools is something that he had gone through, and said it made him grow to hate himself because he didn't know what he was. He said he didn't know what being gay was. He said that not having people to listen or to talk to him made him feel insane, and that he suppressed those feelings, which is a problem. Have you heard other stories like this? And do you think that other kids will feel that same way that this teenager, and again, we should say that he is now at a school that is a LGBTQ plus affirming school and feels comfortable, and he is just talking about his prior experiences. So do you think that more people will have those experiences in public schools?
Yes, I do. I think, one thing, one of the more egregious issues of this was like forcing trusted adults to out that child to the parents. Now, and I want to set the record straight. I just want to be clear here. When I say this, it's not that, when I was growing up, it's not that I never had a teacher that said, don't tell your parents, don't tell your parents. But I did have trusted adults who I was able to go and talk to about these issues. And, and it was always followed by, well, how do you feel about talking to your parents about this? Do they know? Because, fortunately for me, I had a safe, supportive environment when I went home, but not all these other kids do. If we want to look at 45% of youth who are homeless, 45% of youth who are homeless are LGBTQ identified, despite the fact that they're only 10% of the population. So we're talking about youth that are getting kicked out, that are suffering from neglect, suffering from abuse. It might not be related to them being LGBTQ, but I don't think that it would be any surprise that that is a serious contributing factor in why some of these kids get kicked out. That child is going to know what their situation at home is going to be like best. But now we're in a situation where where the school might be the only safe place where that kid feels comfortable being themselves. But now we're in a situation where the teachers, administrators, guidance counselors, everyone would have to be, violating that trust that they have as a trusted adult between that student in order to and out that child to their parents. That's really frightening in a lot of ways, particularly if we want to talk about, like I said, not being able to talk this out to folks. We're already seeing, there's a huge amount of suicide risk with LGBTQ identified folks. We have a homeless youth problem where they are disproportionately represented within that population, and I think that this will just exacerbate those issues. Once again, instead of dealing with real issues, like making sure that Alabama is a place where all can feel safe, can go to school, can go to work, and just be, and do what, and just live their lives. I mean, just live their lives. Why can't we just let people live their lives in this state?
There has always been a kind of an idea about Alabama and about Alabama politicians that they wanted schools to be independent. Our school districts are independent. It is something that they do not like to, lawmakers, meaning they do not like to make large scale mandates over schools. This is a shift from that policy and that history there. Do you think that lawmakers should be getting involved in schools and in classrooms, especially those who are not teachers or who have not worked in schools?
Well, I think there is a huge problem with the fact that we have no people who are teachers in the legislature, who are actively teachers. We have some retired ones, but you cannot be a teacher at the same time you are doing this. So I think there's a huge problem there. Now, here's the thing. With schools, there's a reason why education policy is its own standing committee, is because education is a very important part. And while the legislature has some role in trying to craft and review their curriculum, make sure that we're being innovative, that we're being equitable, that we're moving forward and teaching our kids the best way we know how to. This ain't it. That's not what we're doing here. We're just demonizing an already vulnerable population to score cheap political points.
I know how you feel and how you say you feel, Neil, about these laws, but are you surprised by them?
Yes and no. No, because it's an election year. a national phenomenon where these bills are sweeping through, and I think Alabama just got caught up in those election year politics, and that's what we're looking at here. But it does surprise me because I know that the people of Alabama are decent, that they're compassionate, that they have generosity and a charitable heart. We deserve better. And I feel like the people of Alabama deserve better. And I feel like they want more. They want better. So I'm a little surprised because of that. Because I think that at the end of the day, this isn't solving any issue. This isn't solving any problem. It's just causing more problems for Alabama families and Alabama educators and dedicated medical professionals who practice in this state.
You talk about this conflict and this divide, and that seems to have only grown in just legislatures across the country and in the Alabama legislature. Now, you said on Thursday, you talked again about growing up different and how hard it was. And again, being Alabama's only openly gay member of the legislature, then that is, you are the only one who can speak from experience about this. And you again had several powerful words, but you ended it by saying, just don't you call me a friend after this. Do you still feel that way?
Yes. I mean, in a way, the thing is, you have to realize that when you're passing policy, and this has been an emphasis of mine ever since these bills were first introduced 3 years ago, why are we not looking at the human impact, the on the ground impact for how this is going to affect actual people, your actual constituents, people that go to church with you, people that shop at the same, grocery store as you. They need to know that, no, you can't. I mean, you can't call me a friend. I mean, that you just can't, because the problem is that you don't realize, despite me telling this ad nauseum to you, how harmful this will be to a whole group of people. So yeah, no, I mean, there might be room for forgiveness at some point, but right now, I mean, but here's the thing, and this is really where I need to back up. My feelings on this don't matter. Okay. What matters right now is making sure that these affected families, that these affected teachers, affected children know that there's support and there's resources out there for them. That's what's important. That's what really needs to get out there, that the fight's not over, that there is a court battle ensuing, and that just don't be afraid. I still got your back. That there's others that still got your back.
Well, and I wanted to follow that up and say, what do you say, or what do you suggest that people do, transgender or LGBTQ plus teenagers, minors, no matter which of these laws they are affected by? What do you suggest they do? We have heard from people who have minors that are receiving some of these medical care, some of these hormone blockers and other medicines that will pretty soon be outlawed, and they will be essentially going into a type of remission from this drug because they will not have been receiving it after this law goes in effect. We have heard stories there. We've heard stories again about people that are worried about going to school and things in the classroom. So what do you say? What do you suggest for people who are directly affected by these laws to do?
So I would first say that we're talking about medications that have evidence and are medically necessary. And then I would follow that up with saying, don't be afraid. I understand that you are terrified, petrified. And if you are, I feel like you have every right to be. I would say there's a lot of people, there's a lot of organizations. The whole world's watching us right now. And the whole world's not going to stand for this. So I don't know how it will get sorted out somehow. Now, how is that going to look? What's that going to work? How's that going to work out? I don't know, but I'm saying do not give up hope yet. Do not give up hope. Just it's not the time to sit back. I'm not talking to the kids here. Once again, I understand that they're terrified and they just want to, I get that. I would just say, but now's not the time to sit back and just take it. It's a time to fight back and change it.
Neil Rafferty, Representative Rafferty, thank you so much for your time today, for breaking some of this down and giving us your thoughts on this. And as you mentioned, there are several lawsuits right now. We will continue to follow these developments and keep everybody updated. We'll also leave some of those resources you mentioned. We'll put them here in the comments so people can find those as well. Neil, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And everybody watching, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Ivana.